Welcome back, America. Jake Tapper's got a brand new thriller out. This is it. All the demons are here. Welcome back, Jake. Good to have you back on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Congratulations. Another great thriller.
Thank you so much, Hugh. It's great to be back.
It is a very good read. It's also, I think, a very provocative metaphor. Am I right about that latter part?
I think it's fair to say. Yeah, there are a couple metaphors in there that are resonant to today's politics and today's news media situation 100%. Even though the novel takes place in 1977, I played with some of the characters there and invented others to make it relevant to today.
1977 is my sweet spot, Jake. You're too young, but I lived that. I was a senior in college in 1977 and 78. So I lived all this stuff, including the blackout. And you got it pitch perfect. Who was your research advisor on 1977? Because you're too young.
Well, I was 8. So it's true, I don't remember much. I remember the gas lines and Jimmy Carter, and I remember Elvis dying, which was very sad to me because I was an Elvis fan. But as with all these books, the first one, The Hellfire Club in 1954, and the second one, The Devil May Dance in 1962, I dove into research from the time, and Life Book of the Year, and People Book of the Magazine of the Year, and read a lot and watched a lot of documentaries. Evel Knievel is a big character in the book, as you know. I watched a great documentary that Johnny Knoxville produced called Being Evil. Watched another great documentary about Elvis Presley called The King by Eugene Jarecki. And thankfully, 77 is recent enough that there's a lot of documentary evidence and newspaper reports and stuff that's very accessible. And it was really fun. My memory of 1977 is probably a lot lamer than your memory of 1977 because mine was just in my backyard, and I didn't know about the wild. I knew of disco music, but I didn't know how wild Studio 54 was. I knew. Well, I didn't know about Summer of Sam and the Son of Sam murders. My parents hid that from me. It was a rediscovery of an era for me, and it really was a very bizarre time. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. People talk about that being in the 60s. It's sex, drugs, and disco, but the 70s was a much more wild time.
It's definitely 77 to 80. The curse of disco fell on my college years. And it was called Boston, Boston in Boston, not Studio 54, but very much the same thing. Jake, I am surprised, though, by Elvis. I am not an Elvis guy. We're going to come back and play the only Elvis song when we do our third segment as the intro on the radio. Where did you pick up this Elvis stuff? Because the fetching Mrs. Hewitt loved Graceland, but she's not an Elvis person either, and she's also a senior in college in 1977, 78. Where does Elvis come from?
My mom. My mom was a big Elvis fan, born in 1942, so that's really in her sweet spot. And so I knew Elvis music from her, and he was pretty cool. I mean, for me, 6, 7, 8 years old, his comeback special on NBC, the 1968 comeback special. I defy you to find a better hour of television. It's funny. So the book tells the story of Ike, who is a 20-year-old AWOL Marine, and Lucy, who's a 22-year-old aspiring journalist in Washington. They are the kids of the protagonists in the two previous books. And Lucy, the journalist, has a lot of my habits and a lot of my more annoying tics, like correcting people when they misuse the word ironic and such. But
ironic! A footnote gets dropped on ironic.
Ike's love of Elvis is truly my love of Elvis. Ike is a very different character than me. He's a very tough Marine, and that's not me and all that. But Ike's love of Elvis is my love of Elvis.
I came back, Jake, to San Clemente in the winter of 79, having gone home to Ohio. I was working for Nixon, and my dingy little apartment had been broken into and rifled, so I had to go across the street because they'd pulled the phone out of the cord. And I walked into a museum to Elvis. I mean, it was creepy, spooky. Some people go way in on Elvis. And I thought to myself, maybe Jake has some of the Elvis bourbon jugs and no, none of that stuff. There's no Elvis behind you.
But as a kid, I did, I have somewhere in storage Elvis paintings and Elvis prints and Elvis cups and such that I got as birthday presents when I turned 7, when I turned 8, when I turned 9, from friends of mine. I mean, they're not hanging up anywhere now, but they do exist somewhere. Yeah, I was a legitimate fan of the King, and his death
A
in August
diversion.
1977
You
it's a
describe
big
his
part of
death
it.
in 77. You describe
Say that
how he
again.
dies, and everybody goes to Graceland. And
Yeah.
you talk about the kitsch that arrives, this sort of souk of Elvis kitsch. And I'm curious, do you personally own any t shirts? Because I think you finally nailed it why people buy concert t shirts. I have never,
Right.
I wish I had bought one at Bob Dylan, the Rolling Thunder Review, but I didn't. Do you own any?
I don't have any Elvis T-shirts. No, I do
How
have
about
concert
concert
T-shirts.
t shirts?
Yeah, I know. I have concert T-shirts. The most recent one was Darius Rucker. Yeah, you
You
wear
know,
it to show people that you went there.
you
It's
know, you
it's
put your
it's
finger
not
on it.
even about the person. It's about you, really.
It's about you. It's like a tattoo for some people, and it's very well articulated. Before we get too far ahead, we got to say all the demons are here 7 times, according to Frank Luntz, to sell all the demons are here, although it's flying off shelves. Give people the backstory of the Martyr family, because they may not have read the Hellfire Club or its sequel. Tell them about Charlie Martyr and the rest of them.
So Charlie Martyr is a World War II hero and a New York City academic, a historian at Columbia University. And in the first book, he is an unlikely congressman. He becomes a member of Congress. He is basically a Rockefeller or an Eisenhower Republican thrust into the world of Joe McCarthy's Washington D.C. in 1954, and no fan of communists, but also no fan of Joe McCarthy. He finds himself trying to do good, but as I have seen with so many people who come to this town, Washington, he makes compromise after compromise after compromise before he knows what he's doing. He's no longer trying to do good. He's trying to just like keep his head above water. So that's the Hellfire Club. The second book, Attorney General Robert Kennedy blackmails Charlie, and he and his wife Margaret go out to Los Angeles to find out if Frank Sinatra is actually mobbed up or if it's just kind of an act. And this is based on a real story. The real story being that Sinatra, after helping Kennedy get elected in 1960, and maybe some of his underworld friends helped Kennedy too, with the West Virginia primary, not to mention Illinois. Sinatra wanted President Kennedy to stay at his Rancho Mirage compound when he came for a presidential visit, and he had a helipad built. He had all these wires and telephone wires and lodging for the press, etc. And then ultimately, because Sinatra was perceived to be mobbed up, Attorney General Kennedy scotched the trip, and Sinatra lost his mind. So that's the family. That's the Martyr family. He is a Rockefeller Republican, and the party he loves the Republican Party. He's not a fan of Democrats, but the party does change, and he does have issues with some of the directions it's going. In 1977, it is the post-Nixon, post-Vietnam War era, and Charlie, along with a lot of Republicans, are trying to figure out what's next for the Republican Party. That's kind of like a sub-theme in the background of the book.
You know, I read back to back, and I read and listened to All the Demons Are Here, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But then I read Kim Strassel's new book, The Biden Malaise, which is about the Carter years, primarily comparing them to the Biden years. And she's on the nose about the 70s as well as you were on the nose about the 70s. The one thing that you stretched, Charlie Martyr gets elected to the Senate in 1974. No Republicans won anything. They lost 4 net Senate and 49 net in the House. Did anyone win in 1974 that I'm unaware of in the Senate?
Well, remember, okay, so A, this is fiction.
Yeah.
But B, Charlie, in my alternative world, Charlie, because he voted for to impeach Nixon as a member of the House Judiciary Committee. He and real life Congressman Larry Hogan Sr. were the only ones to do so. So in my fictitious world, because Charlie is lauded for that and lauded for his skepticism of the Vietnam War, he gets a lot of Democratic votes, and the Democrats put a weak candidate against him, and that's how he wins. But yes, I recognize that it's fiction, and I have to take some flights of fancy.
Yeah, my first campaign was Paul Cronin's campaign for Congress in 1974, and I was volunteering as a freshman in college. He got wiped out by Paul Zongas. It was just a bad year to be a Republican in 1974 and 76. Jake, why is Charlie Martyr anti-pirate?
Why is he anti-pirate? Because
Yeah,
pirates are not romantic uh, vision. You know, the way that we romanticize them in this country with the Pirates of the Caribbean movies and all, they're horrible. They're
is that a
thieves.
Jake
They're
Tapper
thugs.
thing? Is that a Jake Tapper
Sure.
peeking through the book?
Yes. Well, I mean, it's because somebody uses the term with like our join our merry band of pirates, and Lucy thinks about how much her dad hates that when people romanticize because he's an academic, and you know this. Pirates were marauding, murderous, raping thieves. They were horrible people. There's nothing romantic about it. They weren't soldiers of fortune. They were criminals. They were criminals, and the only reason why anybody
They're
thinks they're romantic is
terrorists.
because they were on boats, right?
Yeah, they're terrorists on boats, but I still
Yeah.
love Talk Like a Pirate Day. In terms
Oh,
of,
sure.
of Lucy and Ike, I am right between them chronologically in age, as you said. I'm right there between those two. And I am curious, is there another martyr child coming along anywhere, or are we going to go 3 generations down the road?
I don't know what's next in terms of fiction. I'm in the middle of writing one that takes place in 1984 because I've done 50s, 60s. This one's 70s. So the next one logically would be the 80s. And I'm in the middle of writing one right now that's from the point of view of Lucy, and she is on a special cruise ship uh, on their way to Normandy in 1984 for the 40th anniversary of the D-Day invasion and Ronald Reagan's big speech and the like. And this cruise ship has all these World War II heroes on it, and all these generals and all these people who helped win the war. And on the very first night, one of the top generals of World War II disappears. So that's the next one in the series. But I don't have Ike or Lucy with child in book 4. So I mean,
All right.
I guess I mean they age, like in Gasoline Alley, like
It's
they're
like
they're
Danny
aging with
Silva and
years.
Gabriel Alon. I'm going to talk to Jake during the break. He's going to come back for 2 more segments. All of this will be on the podcast. Don't go anywhere, radio audience. Jake Tapper will be right back on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. Part 2 of my 4-parter with Jake Tapper about his brand new book, All the Demons Are Here. You can order it from Amazon. Jake, this is a short segment, so I want to know where Caravaggio comes from because he just kind of lands in the middle of the book. And I thought, oh, Jamie Gangel and Danny Silva are talking to Jake about painting. Where did he come from?
So Caravaggio's in there because there is a conversation about can you separate the art from the artist? Can you look at somebody's great achievements, such as Caravaggio's gorgeous art, and distance that from the murderer that was Caravaggio? And it comes in a conversation about Evil Knievel, and can you look at his great achievements as a stuntman while separating him from the fact that he was kind of an awful person, like he was a bigot and he was horrible to his wife, etc. It's a little bit tongue in cheek, but also I wanted to. This is a boozy conversation at the Dead Canary, this fictitious bar in Butte, but it's a conversation that I think a lot of us have about, Woody Allen and all sorts of other people, Michael Jackson, R. Kelly. Can you separate a man from his work, especially when that individual is a horrible person? But Caravaggio just seemed like a fun way to have that conversation, and it was a little too early for them to be talking about. It's 1977 in the book, so they were some of the things that would have offended us in 2023 maybe wouldn't have been as offensive to the culture, especially to Ike and Governor Lucky Strong in this boozy conversation in 1977. So I thought a murderer would be good.
I was reminded of Danny's books, but you mentioned the Bitterroot Mountains. C.J. Box is the only other person who's ever mentioned the Bitterroot Mountains in my reading habits. Do you read C.J.?
I don't, but I spend time out in Idaho every year,
Ah,
and so I am becoming little by little familiar with the terrain out there, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. I will admit I've never spent a winter there, so maybe my love of the land would be a little tempered if I had to live through one of their isolating winters. But I do just love the landscape, and I love to fly fish out there too.
I was going to ask if you were a fly fisherman because that's what takes people to the Mountain West. And a bunch of people, I'd come to Maine in the summer. Don't go anywhere, America. I'll be right back with Jake Tapper on the radio and then fourth segment coming up afterwards. Stay with us. Here's the book. All the Demons Are Here. It's at Amazon. It's also in every bookstore you could possibly want, flying off the shelves. We'll be right back, America. America, if you were like me, a lifeguard in the late 70s, you heard this song about a bazillion times on the chair. Elvis features prominently in Jake Tapper's new thriller, All the Demons Are Here. And that's actually the only song I can remember from Elvis because I wasn't an Elvis guy. But Elvis evil are big in this book. So is a guy named Max Lyon. Is he based on Robert Maxwell loosely?
He's more based on Rupert Murdoch. I mean, he is of that ilk. He is of that ilk of media magnates from the Commonwealth, so either from the UK or from Australia, etc., and comes to the United States to get a toehold in American media. Starts off with a newspaper, wants a TV channel. He's at the beginning of building his empire in the United States, although he has this empire throughout the English-speaking world. And he's fictitious, Max Lyon. But in terms of 1977, as you know, Hugh, was not just the son of Sam murders, which gripped New York City. It was also the rise of the New York Post and the New York Daily News. And I tried to get into the head of a Rupert Murdoch type or Robert Maxwell type. And one of the arguments he makes when talking about his journalism, and it's kind of a through line because they're wooing Lucy to become a journalist at their fictitious DC tabloid, the Washington Sentinel. One of the points they make is the New York Times is barely covering the son of Sam murders. It's like a local crime story. Meanwhile, to New Yorkers, this is a huge story. There is a serial killer, preying on people in the outer boroughs. And so there's a line actually that the Max Lyon character makes, says, it's on page 90, but I can't remember exactly, but it's something along the lines of, I know of no other industry in the world that so confidently is determined to give the people what they do not want. And that's his view of the news media, especially newspapers at the time. And that attitude that I think, I wouldn't say it's a completely correct diagnosis, but there's something there that leaves a chasm for tabloid journalism to fill.
Max Lyon says, and I think it's in that monologue on page 90, there's a great anger growing in America, and it's going uncovered as a result of the, let's call it elite media's refusal to cover it. But the son of Sam also occurred in the summer of the blackout. There was the big blackout, the first blackout. This is the second blackout. Not many people remember the second blackout, Jake. Did you live part of that? Was that close enough to Philly to remember?
No, this is all just through my research. I mean, it's just really amazing when I went to figure out how to do this book and where to put it. It's just amazing the number of things that happened in 1977. The birth of Studio 54, the New York City blackout, the son of Sam murders, Elvis dies, and not to mention a whole bunch of other subtexts. Jimmy Carter's first year, obviously the Nixon Frost interviews air, and on and on. UFO sightings, cult membership. It's between, in terms of cults, it's between the creepy crawlies and Charles Manson, but before Jonestown, which I think is like in the early 80s. So there is this distrust and frustration and disillusionment amongst the public. Jimmy Carter does not end up being a remedy for it. Some of it comes from Vietnam War, some of it comes from Watergate, some of it just comes from overall frustration, and it is there and it's real, and some of the grievances are grounded in reality, and that's one of the things I wanted to write about, because I feel like we're in a very similar period right now.
And we're going to talk about that in segment 4, but I do want to say to the radio audience, the best line in the book, which I always try and find a line in a book, is the causes don't compete, they coagulate. Now, I haven't heard that said anywhere before, but it is actually quite accurate about today and probably about every demonstration I've been to, going back to 1978, the demonstration at San Onofre and San Clemente had 20 different groups there because it was an occasion to get your name out there. Is that your diagnosis of today on both the left and the right? The causes don't
Yeah,
compete, they coagulate?
I think so. I think that, that's specifically about a specific group of people in this fiction following Evil Knievel and his fictitious run for president across the country. But as you see, Hugh, in that mob are some people who are just, prone to violence and crazy, and some people who have really legitimate grievances with the country. I mean, I think the most sympathetic characters in the book are the Vietnam veterans who are camping out in the West, and Ike joins up with them. And some of them are suffering from, they don't know what it is yet, but some of them are suffering from cancer as a result of Agent Orange. And there are real grievances there, and people who are frustrated often find common cause. And whether it's at a Trump rally or at a Black Lives Matter protest or in this fictitious book, in this fictitious mob, there are lots of people with lots of different issues, and they can sense a common cause, if not an exact common purpose, I think.
In fact, stay tuned. You got to listen to the podcast today because there's a character in All the Demons Are Here named Caleb White, who's based on Chad Green, which I know quite a lot about because I had to write a paper about him as a senior at Harvard, and I followed Dr. Truman around during that whole drama. We're going to talk about that in the final segment on the podcast. Go out and get Jake Tapper's All the Demons Are Here. It's a good summary. To Selena Zito tweeted this morning, belongs under every umbrella. Thank you for listening, America. I'll be back on the radio show tomorrow, and we'll finish the podcast and post it shortly. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. Last segment with Jake Tapper. Jake, I got weirded out when you brought up Caleb White because I knew Dr. Truman, who was Chad Green's doctor. To avoid taking any science courses as an undergraduate, I took the sociology of cancer for the Nat Sci requirement. And I went down to Mass Gen and I followed Dr. Truman around, and he was trying to get the Green family to treat Chad with what would have been painful but life-saving leukemia. And they took him down to Mexico for Laetrile, and he died. It was a tragedy. How did you find out about that?
So that's a great question. So Slate has a great podcast called 1 Year. And coincidentally, after I had picked 1977 as the year I was going to do for all the reasons I mentioned before, Elvis dying, Studio 54, the New York City blackout, Nixon Frost interviews, Evil Knievel literally jumping sharks, etc. I listened to the podcast, and one of the stories told is this story of this poor little boy and the false hope of Laetrile. For people who don't know, Laetrile was this alternative cure for cancer that was not real and did not work, but a lot of people put their hopes in it. And unfortunately, a lot of people who put their hopes in it ended up dying because they refused to participate in very painful chemotherapy processes that ultimately are the best chance. I wish they weren't. I wish there was a quick and easy pill that people could take. But and then this poor little boy died, and I have a fictitious version of that in All the Demons Are Here, because, well, I don't want to no spoilers, but
No
obviously
spoilers.
there are a lot of there were people who were making money off of Laetrile. I mean, that's just a fact. And poor Steve McQueen put his hopes in the Laetrile and died in Mexico, unsuccessfully fighting cancer. So that's how I heard about it. I heard about it on this podcast, and I thought that really reminds me in many ways of the skepticism that people have today about the CDC and the NIH and medicine. And I'm not talking about COVID now, but just in general, there is just this mistrust of science, and this belief that in 1977 this was a very real thing. Jimmy Carter was asked about it during one of his call-ins at the White House, where there was this woman in North Carolina, and her dad had cancer, and he wanted to be able to try Laetrile. And at that time it was the Department of Health, Education and Welfare, but they wouldn't sign off on it because there was no medical evidence backing it. And again, he died, and it's just such, it's sad, but it is so evocative to all the mistrust of government and mistrust of health advice that we heard in the last few years, and also just more broadly this quackery about childhood vaccines, which are life-saving, and this idea that the people are just pushing childhood vaccines because they want to make money as opposed to they want to save lives. It's this very real thing. It's out there. It's on the left. It's on the right. And it was worth writing about because, you and I have talked about this before, Hugh, but history doesn't repeat itself. It's been said, it rhymes. And there's a lot of rhyming with that chapter.
Dr. Truman was so in agony over what these parents did because he loved the little boy. You get to love these kids when you treat them, and they spirited him away, and it was a disaster. But it was the first eruption of distrust. And the right to try legislation, I think, has its roots back in Chad Green. Jake, now let's talk about the metaphor. Evil. I don't know much about evil except the Snake River jump. And I've used a lot of metaphors for former President Trump. He's Nelson Rockefeller without the art collection. He's P.T. Barnum without the circus. He's a lot of things. But you use evil. And I don't know if you meant it to be Trump, but he had a love of spectacle. He was not tied to anything that was new. He's something of a bargain bit. The entire decade was a Polaroid feeling. Evil never made calculations. Then you warned, don't confide in evil, because if you confide in evil, evil will use it. And evil surrounded himself with yes men. Now, that's not Donald Trump 100%, but how much is evil a metaphor for the former president?
Well, I think that when I learned, I was not a fan of Evel Knievel as a kid. His charm eluded me. But I had friends who had Evel Knievel lunchboxes and Evel Knievel action figures and the like. And I was out fishing in Idaho, and a friend of mine is a huge fan of Evel Knievel. And obviously, Idaho is where the Snake River jump, or the failed Snake River jump, took place. And he is a quintessentially American character. He's not meant to be Donald Trump in the book, but he and Trump both share this quintessential American character of, and this is not meant in a pejorative way. Obviously, Evel Knievel and Donald Trump are two very different people. Evel Knievel was a thief and a criminal early in his career, but they have this. You talked about P.T. Barnum. They have this ability to capture a public's imagination, to get news media coverage, to shoot from the hip and not really pay any consequence when it comes to saying things that if other people said them, they're so offensive that they would get in trouble. There is something larger than life, his charisma, his ability to get fans and supporters, that is evocative of Donald Trump. And it is not hard to imagine them, if the timing had worked out, being friends or allies or
100%.
Maybe competitors in some ways.
Yeah, he would have been. I say Nelson Rockefeller without the art collection because Nelson Rockefeller had a quite colorful personal history. He was dyslexic. He did not read. He just kind of made it up as he went along. He never met a headline he didn't like. He was New York and he was big. But Evel Knievel is very on the nose on evil. I didn't like him at all. I watched the Snake River jump because the whole country did. It probably had a 99 share when that happened because everyone thought he was going to run into the canyon wall and die, but he didn't. And I didn't know he was named Bob. It's wonderfully plotted. I want to talk about the mechanics of this right now. I told you when we were setting up the interview, you sent me the book, thank you. But you also, I bought the tape because I have to use my time. And the readers are quite good, and you use two narrators. So how did you select the narrators for this? Because there's Lucy and there's Ike.
Right. In the chapter, the book is told in first person, and the chapters go back and forth between Ike and his adventure in Montana with Evel Knievel, and Lucy and her adventure in tabloid journalism in Washington. I did it to see if I could do it, to see if I could pull it off. Because the previous two books were in third person, which is safer and easier to write in. And I wanted to try not only to write in first person, but to go back and forth between Ike and Lucy, to have them sound different, to have them read different. We hired obviously two different voice actors to do their chapters, and I think they did a really good job. I got to listen to audition tapes and the like.
I was wondering. Yeah, I was wondering if you actually listened to audition tape for vocal artists, because nowadays, if you get the wrong person, it kills the book. I won't listen to a bad narrator.
No, that's such an important part. Right now, I'm listening to Paul Newman's memoir and on tape, and it's read by Jeff Daniels, and it's good because it's Jeff Daniels. I mean, I listened to Quentin Tarantino's novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and it's read by Jennifer Jason Leigh. So like if you have the right narrator, it's good. And I'm like you, I buy the Kindle version and I hook it up with the Audible version so I can listen to it in the car. And then if I want to keep reading, it is already adjusted to where I was in the page, and I can keep reading. And
Oh, it
it's a,
does? Oh, I didn't know
oh
that.
yeah,
Oh,
oh yeah. You
I
can
have to
hook up
cut
the
it off
Kindle
at a
to the,
chapter.
yeah, yeah. You can hook up
All
the
right,
Kindle
last
to
question,
the
Jake.
Audible.
How in the world do you do a book tour in the middle? I think you're interviewing Ron DeSantis. Maybe that's already in the can. But how do you
What's
do a
tomorrow?
book tour in the middle of a presidential campaign?
It's difficult, but obviously everything I need to do for the Ron DeSantis interview takes priority over any book stuff. So we've just rescheduled a lot of things, and this interview will be tomorrow from Columbia, South Carolina, and that's obviously top priority because that's my most important job, my day job, being a journalist, asking Governor DeSantis these questions. I know this is the first quote unquote legacy media interview he's done, and I want it to be fair, but I also want it to be tough, and I want it to be, there's no way I'm going to please everybody, that's for sure, but I want it to be, you know what I mean, Hugh, in that sweet
Yeah.
spot of like respectful, but also like you're interviewing for the most important job in the world. Let's have some good questions.
His memoir is very good. He's a kid from the land because his grandfather's from Pittsburgh and his mother is from Poland, Ohio. So he's actually got a lot of Midwestern in him. Jake, I'll let you go. This is a fabulous read. All the demons are here. Congratulations. Keep selling books. I'll see you soon.
Thanks, Hugh. Appreciate it. Good to see you.